Right, so for months, Israeli cargo moved through Greek ports. Israeli cruise ships docked on its islands, and the government told the public it was just business. But the dock workers disagreed, didn't they? Yes, come back to them. They stopped the cranes, didn't they? They stopped moving Israeli goods. It's a story that's been replicated elsewhere around the Mediterranean too, but not quite to the devastating effect we're now seeing in Greece. For months, Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis had balanced on the claim that Greece could be a reliable ally abroad and a democracy at home. When the workers refused to touch a ship carrying steel for Israel's war, that line collapsed. The state that has now lengthened the working day and banned protests around Parliament can no longer claim to speak for the nation. The dockers didn't issue a manifesto, they did something even harder. They withdrew consent. And what began as protests about Israel a few months ago have now grown into something so much wider. And yet the dock workers remain at the heart of it all. In a country sold as stable and compliant, that single act exposed who really runs Greece and who it now answers to. It's a lesson other states and other ordinary people could perhaps take some inspiration from. Right, so if we cast our minds back a few months, all of this started on the docks at Piraeus, didn't it? Not in Parliament. For months, the Greek government had treated its ports as something like neutral ground, somewhere business could carry on, all while Israel's war in Gaza raged on their television screens just across the water. A lot of Israeli business goes through their ports, critical Mediterranean hubs as those Greek ports are. But that pretense ended back in July, when dock workers refused to unload an Israeli-linked vessel carrying military-grade steel, because they knew what it was going to be used for. The cranes froze above the ship and stayed still. The refusal was recorded, verified, very much public. I covered the story at the time. But in that moment, Greece stopped pretending its role in the war was invisible. The assumption was that nothing moral would interrupt what was profitable to them. But for the first time, the question of Greek complicity in Israel's war moved from moral debate to economic interruption. That refusal was the point where the old order of silence collapsed. And within days, more workers joined them. The same port saw a second obstruction action. The Dock Workers Union, backed by statements from solidarity networks, turned a simple refusal into a full-on blockade. The port's normal traffic was halted for hours. Other labour groups issued support. This was more than symbolic activism. It was a breach in a logistical chain that Greece's allies rely on. The government did not intervene directly, and that silence said more than any speech possibly could, because it signalled that Athens hoped the incident would just fade without consequence and it would all just go away in a few days. But it didn't. On the 18th of July, a mass blockade was documented again at Piraeus. It drew solidarity from dockers abroad as well. Greece's participation in Israel's supply network had become more visible, you see. The imagery of those halted cranes and grounded containers moved fast in certain parts of the media. When the port stopped, people paid attention to that. Days later, the confrontation reached the Greek islands. On the 22nd of July, protesters at Syros physically prevented passengers from the Israeli cruise ship Crown Iris from disembarking. Around 150 people took part in that, and the ship ended up leaving without making a proper call. And the photographs of that event again circulated globally. For the first time, Israeli tourism met direct resistance at a European port. And what had been framed as solidarity with Gaza was now a national argument about what exactly Greece stood for. The state had assumed that protests about Palestine would stay rhetorical, be confined to the students and the activists. But the dockers changed that. Their labour gave the issue massive leverage. Once ordinary workers began obstructing trade and tourism, Israel's war stopped being an external topic. It became part of Greek domestic life, one that exposed how deeply foreign policy and economic dependency can intertwine. The state's public silence was an admission that it understood the risk. If dockers could refuse one ship, they could refuse others. Well, the silence didn't pay off for them. In early August, reports confirmed further blockades at Piraeus targeting shipments believed to be Israeli-bound, and demonstrations spread to the likes of Thessaloniki or Mytilene or Zakynthos and Chania. Each was documented with local coverage and photographic evidence. "Not in our land, not in our name" appeared on banners amongst other slogans. The protests coincided with the summer tourist season, directly hitting one of Greece's most valued economic sectors. But by this month, the confrontation had widened big time. On the 1st of October, a nationwide strike shut down transport, schools and hospitals. And the cause was domestic this time, the government's plan to lengthen working hours in the private sector. The proposed law allowed up to 13 hours of work a day. 2 weeks later, on the 14th of October, another nationwide strike repeated the shutdown. But 2 days later, Parliament passed the law regardless. The strikes came first, the law followed, and the conflict just intensified from there. While Europe debated shorter work weeks, Greece was going in the opposite direction, lengthening the day for those already exhausted. The same administration that had offered ports and airspace for Allied operations in the Gaza war was now offering longer hours to employers. Greece's parliament acted as if domestic labour could be extended indefinitely just to satisfy the same external interests it serves abroad. The people doing the longest days are those with the least say in how their work is used. When the dockers stopped a ship, they reclaimed that say. The 13-hour law took it away again. So 1 week later, Parliament voted to restrict protests at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier outside the legislature. The new rule banned demonstrations in that square, a place historically used for vigils and rallies. Families of the victims of the 2023 Tempe rail disaster condemned the move immediately. They'd stood there to demand accountability for that tragedy and now found the site off limits to them. The government claimed it was protecting a national monument. The public understood it was protecting itself from confrontation. Their former silence now looked like they were hiding from the public. They would say they had every reason to do so. But this was the second time this month that the Greek state redefined the limits of public participation. It had already redefined the length of a working day. Now it redefined where grief and dissent could be expressed. But for ordinary people, the optics were obvious. Extend what employers can take from them and restrict where they can speak out about it. The official justification was order, but the effect was control. Well, yesterday, the cycle completed. Following renewed protests against Israeli cruise ships, police deployments increased at Patras and Katakolo, the government again cited order and safety. So the pattern was identical to July. Israeli tourism and trade would be protected. Greek protesters would be managed, inverted commas. The state had returned to the ports, but on the other side of the picket line from everybody else. So the timeline of Greek protest was now established. In July, refusal to unload an Israeli cargo ship at Piraeus. Mid-July, repeat the blockade. 18th of July, mass action and foreign solidarity. 22nd of July, Crown Iris denied docking at Syros. August, further protests across multiple ports and cities. 1st and 14th of October, nationwide strikes against the 13-hour working day. 16th of October, law passed. 21st to the 22nd of October, protest ban outside Parliament. 29th of October, increased police protection for Israeli cruise traffic because they will be allowed to travel to Greece no matter what the Greek citizenry have to say about it. So where these might seem like separate issues, that's what the Greek government is actually after. But together, these events all describe a single process at work. The government attempting to treat foreign policy, labour policy, and protest control as separate. The dock workers have made them all one. They've demonstrated that Greece's subordination to external power, financial, political, and military, all run through all of the same mechanisms that exploit its workers. And you can see that reflected in other nations as well. Their refusal converted solidarity into domestic resistance. The state's reaction exposed how little democratic space actually exists when foreign alignment and economic discipline take precedence over meeting the needs of your own people. This chain of events shows how a government can lose legitimacy without losing an election. Every decision it's taken between July and October has placed international alliances and corporate logistics ahead of its own people. Every move narrowed the margin for dissent, but the outcome was not stability, it was national backlash. The dockers' position in this is structurally important because ports are the country's choke points. Greece has loads of them, are heavily dependent on them. They depend on maritime routes for trade, for tourism and supply. When the dockers act, the effects register immediately. They hold practical sovereignty. The government holds formal sovereignty. So this is a confrontation between the two. And that's the real contest over who actually runs the country. The 13-hour law and the protest ban confirm the government's alignment with external priorities, a government not interested in serving its own people but exploiting them for others. The first ensures labour remains flexible for investors and creditors. The second ensures that protests cannot easily disrupt that flexibility. Both moves demonstrate where Greek sovereignty now sits. It is negotiated through markets and alliances, not its own people. The government describes these decisions as modernisation, though, and that language is deliberate as well as rubbish. But it recodes the regression as progress. A 13-hour day is not modern at all. It's thoroughly regressive. A protest ban in front of Parliament is not modern at all. They are both mechanisms of control. The dock workers' refusal to accept this any more than they would accept Israeli destined goods detonated that control. So what began as a local dispute has become a national confrontation over control of time, control of space, and moral direction. The government's attempt to reassert order through legislation and policing has achieved the exact opposite. The crackdown broadcast the scale of the dissent. The longer day and the smaller square became symbols of the same subordination. The chronology leaves no doubt about the state's priorities. It moved faster to protect Israeli cruise lines than to enforce safe working conditions or secure accountability for a domestic rail disaster. It cited public order to justify both labour repression and protest restrictions. The same term covered everything inconvenient. Order meant submission to power. The record also shows that the public has not accepted this quietly any more than the dockers have. They basically joined them instead. The strikes now seen have been among the largest since the pandemic. The protests at the ports resumed despite police presence. The families of Tempe's victims refused to retreat from public space. Each of these responses carried material risk. None of them were gestures, they were acts of reclamation. You won't see control. You will not control and coerce us like this. Not over working hours, not over protest, and certainly not over Israel. Greece's current government believes it can manage all of this by attrition. It calculates that fatigue, tourism revenue, and fear will eventually outlast anger. That calculation underestimates the moral weight of the dockers' example. Once a population sees that refusal can change events, the idea can't be withdrawn. The government can police the ports, but it can't restore the belief that neutrality is possible. The international context matters only to the extent that it explains the pressure. Greece's alliance with Israel and its integration into NATO logistics makes it a peripheral but useful base in a wider system. The dock workers disrupted that system from below. Their strike actions and moral refusals exposed the limits of what the state can control when workers exercise practical sovereignty. Their right to withdraw their labour, and with Greece's powerful dock workers' unions backing them, it's become a showdown. The reaction inside Greece shows the same alignment. Labour law and protest law were designed to reassure investors and allies that Greece remains stable. The longer day is a gift to employers. The smaller protest zone is a gesture to order. The increased policing of Israeli cruise arrivals is a message to partners that Greece remains reliable for them. In all three cases, reliability ends up meaning obedience. So by the end of this month, every citizen who followed the news could see the structure clearly. A state that lengthens the working day while narrowing protest space and guarding foreign tourists is not defending national interest. It's managing domestic resistance to foreign priorities. That's the definition of lost sovereignty, surely. The dock workers turned moral objection into material effect. Their refusal forced the government to reveal its hierarchy of loyalty. In a few weeks, the line from the quay at Piraeus reached the parliament steps in Athens. The government responded by criminalising proximity. It banned the square, extended the day, reinforced the ports. The issue now is not whether the movement will win quickly, it's whether Greece can continue to call itself self-governing while its citizens fight to control their own time and public space. The dock workers' answer came first and cost them the most. They stopped a ship, and in doing so, they stopped Greece pretending it hadn't picked a side in this. The record stands without any need for any embellishment. July's refusal was verified. The subsequent blockades were verified. The Syros action was verified. The national strikes and their causes were verified. The law and the vote were recorded. The protest ban and the families' reactions were recorded. The late October police protection of Israeli cruise ships was recorded. No step in this chain depends on any conjecture at all. It's all evidenced. The government's actions show deliberate strategy, not accident. It's all in the public record. It did not fail to notice what the dockers had done. It chose to prioritise output and perception over autonomy. The same state that tells its people to work longer tells them not to stand where they can be seen. It's the language of control. So when the crane stopped at Piraeus, Greece saw a rare moment of unambiguous power from below. It forced the state to reveal what it serves and what it fears. The dockers' defiance exposed a hierarchy that runs from the port to the parliament and ends elsewhere. The government claims order. The people have shown what that order is going to cost them. The question now is how long the state can hold the country in obedience when its workers have already drawn a line in the sand. For more on the dock workers' instigation of protest in Greece against the movement of Israeli goods, do check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.